Hi, this is Phil, and I'm here to tell you all about the Capes and Lunatics Patreon. Get early access to all of our interviews, including the monthly Chichester Chats with writer and comic book legend D.G. Chichester, new episodes of classic Capes and Lunatics shows, including The Quantum Zone, This, That, or the Third, and many, many more specials, all completely uncensored. Access starts for $3 a month, full video when you pledge $5 a month. Check out the link in our show notes or go to patreon.com/CapesandLunatics. Hope to see you there. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another month of the Chichester Chats. I am Phil. Lilith is here, and of course, you know who is here. Man, it's all named after Mr. D. Chichester.
Hello to you both. I feel that we have to update the intro, though, since I was just invited to a small convention in Connecticut, and they identified me as the astronomically legendary.
So, yes, I like that. Yes,
it was a very Carl Sagan kind of statement. So, but we'll see how that one goes. And anyway, good to see you guys. Thank you again for the invitation back. And as we were talking about before we started, thank you for coming to this Hershey convention I was at. It was extraordinarily cool to see you both in person and outside of these little tiny boxes.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Well, again, we loved coming up seeing you, and we're just like, hopefully he doesn't look too annoyed to see us. But no, it was a great time. No,
it was like that. Wait a minute, they're not tiny little box faces.
All right. So yeah. Hey, I was going to say, as annoying as we may or may not have been, at least we weren't trying to break down the doors to get to you, as like some people did.
Who was trying? What?
Remember that door off to the side there? Because you were in the.
Yeah. That clamming. They finally opened it up and just left it open, which made much more sense. The flow through improved dramatically, I think, for everybody.
Because they just like ripped open these wood double doors, and
yeah. The guy just like wrenched it open. And,
you heard it cracking. I was like, oh, jeez.
Maybe, yeah. And I was worried about putting like a print on the wallpaper, like painter's tape or something. People are just ripping the doors off the hinges. So I don't know what I had to worry about.
That would have been funny if they would have been like, "What happened here, sir?" And you were like, "My fans, they're crazy."
Exactly. I could have like made a whole video out of it. And just convince people of my extraordinary popularity, astronomical popularity.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because you said you got invited to another one in Connecticut. Yeah.
Yes, a little tiny one. But I think, or it sounds tiny, but who knows? We'll go and see. Just a one-day show on the 27th.
Close to home, though, at least.
Yeah, sort of. Connecticut's like a tiny state, but it's like when you start to drive to places, everything seems like it's forever away. It's about an hour and a half, so it's not that bad. But knocking on wood, since it took me 7.5 hours to get back from Pennsylvania.
But yeah, no, I saw on social media, it must have been quite the adventure getting home, huh?
Oh, it's horrifying. It was the worst. It was like, it was like 3.5 hours to get there. We're figuring like smooth sailing. And it was, you just know how society is going to break down, ultimately, as if it hasn't already, because, apparently there's some big accident on I-78, which was the major road back. And it just, the GPS for everybody, for hundreds and hundreds of cars, just kept pointing everybody to I-78, even though it was closed down. And so you had all these cars going in giant circles, and then it was just rerouting everybody back to I-78, which you couldn't get on for 20 odd exits. And all you did was have public works workers blocking the roads and directing people away from it with no knowledge of what to do. Everyone's following their GPS. They're going in giant circles. And finally, the last I saw of it was, this woman just got out of her car in the middle of the road, and she's screaming at the poor public works guy, "I've been in the same goddamn circle, 14 times. What do I do?" And he's just pointing for her to get back in the circle. And my wife finally just, inarticulately but correctly just said, "We have to go north, go north." And I don't know what that means. I don't even know what direction is north. But the point, we finally arrived at was just to go so far north that we would avoid on the back roads of Pennsylvania, which were interesting, to then get onto another major roadway, which would take us east. But that ended up adding, between all that and everything, like 3+ hours to the adventure. So
that's all right. That's all right. My wife decided to put a different route home on the GPS, and then meanwhile we ran into this huge thunderstorm. I could barely see like 2 feet.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I got that one over there snoring in the back seat.
Okay.
So better than me throwing up from motion sickness.
That's true. That's true. I'm sure my son would have loved to have you throw up on him. Yeah.
Better to rest, and so you close your eyes, Lilith, and you're there. What's the big deal? We've arrived. It's all good. It's the way to travel.
Yes,
exactly. Passenger princess, 100%.
Yes, I am very interesting. We're in the middle of conversation. Next thing I know, she's like asleep in the backseat.
So it's a lot of questions for this book.
Oh yes, that's right. The reason we're here. Yes, kids, we are here to talk. Hold on.
Wait. I want to show my mini poster.
Oh, okay. But there's what we're talking. Nightstalkers
nice.
#1.
Very nice. The kickoff, literally the rise of the Midnight Suns.
Exactly. Oh, there you go.
Nice.
That was nice that it came in a poly bag with a little mini. That is my goal in life, is to find an original unopened poly bag, actually.
I've seen people with them, and then if you collected all 6, you could, I guess, ostensibly tape them together in some janky way and get a giant Kubert poster, which would have been cool. But
so yeah, I think we were talking before you jumped on here. I think one of our big questions is what are the challenges, or I'm sure it's not
debuting a #1 in the middle of a crossover,
because this was like part 5 of a 6-part crossover, but it's a #1 of a new series. So
right. Well, that was that was part of the whole genesis of this whole thing. Also made that kind of easy, although the first issue is horribly overwritten in a lot of ways, but because none of this existed, beforehand, right? All these characters existed somewhere. Morbius existed somewhere, and certainly Ghost Rider existed, and Frank Drake and Hannibal King and Blade obviously existed. The Darkhold existed. I don't know that those characters existed before Chris Cooper came up with them. Excuse me, the Emmy Award-winning Chris Cooper. So the first part of it was pitching the book, right? Because and by that I mean literally, Bobby Chase was trying to create, her X-Men, a supernatural X-Men family for herself, and knew that they wanted to do something with these characters, but had no idea what. So she opened the door, I think, to a number of different people to sort of say, what would you do with Frank Drake and Hannibal King and Blade? And that's where I pitched Nightstalkers, right? That they would be this badass bunch of Ghostbusters, essentially, who had been so burdened and made to suffer because of the supernatural that they literally hated the supernatural and would use their supernatural powers to destroy everything supernatural. And then ostensibly in the last issue, they'd kill themselves. But so that was the first part, right? So that was just pitching that and then saying, yeah, this is a great concept. And the weirdo logo that you did on your bad inkjet or your, dot matrix printer, is essentially what they used for the Nightstalkers logo as well. Got somebody to clean it up. But then it was getting us all together to say, all right, well, how do these books tie together anyway? So they had all these separate books, but no concept for how they would interconnect at all. And so that was part one. Ghost Rider had been hugely successful. And so that was part of what they wanted to build on it. Howard hated the whole idea because Howard was having fun doing Ghost Rider and ruling the roost, and suddenly he's got to work with a bunch of people. He didn't want any part of it, until, this get together. And then so we all got together on this 2-day retreat. And that 2-day retreat was where we started kind of spitball these ideas of how would this even work? What are these? Why do they relate to each other? Len Kaminsky brought cigarettes, maybe tobacco, maybe other ones. I don't know.
Oh my!
Definitely tobacco ones. I brought like a 2-foot, 3-foot stack of books on the occult. Howard brought a bad attitude. You know, and when we were all going around the horn, but there was one point, at which, and I'm joking about Howard, I love, and love his writing, but there was a turning point in that meeting where, one of the initial ideas being thrown out was when Howard went from kind of sitting in the corner or over by the window, like, when is this going to be over? And then it suddenly got interesting, right? We would throw ideas out, and then one of those ideas was like, yeah, that would be cool to play with that. And so we then started kind of stitch together, well, why do they relate to each other? Why are they all here? What's happening? Who's the big bad? Who's going to be the magnet that's going to draw them all together? Which is then where we started to come up with Lilith, with the big monster, mama monster type thing. So once we started to map all that out, we're also mapping out the baton pass, right, between everything. So, okay, Ghost Rider's going to end here, and it's going to pass over to whoever was next, Morbius. And Morbius is, I can't remember the exact order, but then, Morbius is going to end here, and it's going to pass the baton to Spirits of Vengeance, and that's going to pass the baton to Darkhold or whatever it was. So we had the beats, after we had the big concept, and because this was still at this point very friendly and casual, and we all liked each other and wanted it to succeed, it was really easy to say, I'm going to end the book here. Is that cool with you? Can you pick up on that? And then go and then end the book here. And you've got these points to relate in your story, right? You've got to establish this, or you've got to make the point about Lilith, and you've got to use Doctor Strange, or whatever you've got to do. So it was not actually that hard. Once we sort of got past that initial, why are we all here, and what are these things, coming up with? Because this wasn't, we came up with the Midnight Suns, the construct. We came up with the with the name of it. We came up with the, what are they, why are they together? Why are these 9 or so, supernaturally oriented characters suddenly bound together when they hadn't been before? And what unites them, and how do they operate as a sort of a team, but then also break up and split up and that sort of thing. So even though that was part 5 of 6, it was part of that larger conversation, and was, as I said, relatively easy, although, it gets pretty purple prose in that first issue. A little, way too much, it's, in the darkness of nights when the rats plow the streets or whatever. I don't remember. I'm trying to forget. But
well, I mean, you're setting a horror vibe. I mean, you got to kind of set the mood, don't you?
Yeah, that's fine. But I could have set the mood with a third the amount of words.
All right, and like what you're saying about passing the baton, so I assume the order of the books was determined by the shipping dates. Is that how it worked? Yeah, and popularity and release, right? And I'm pretty sure Ghost Rider opened it, right? And then the Spirits of Vengeance might have come next, even maybe for a 2 for Punch, or that might have come in the middle. Like, I can't remember. I think Darkhold was the last one. But we had established what they would be, and then once we knew what the order was, then that would have been driven, going to sales, and then establishing the shipping dates and moving from there. And then that would have been based around, because Ghost Rider was the established title and was already running, then that would have been the one everything had to base itself off of and around. Yeah. And then you had all those characters. I mean, you had Ghost Rider and Blaze in this issue. Doctor Strange was in this issue. So, I mean, was that kind of required, where it's like, yeah, this is a big crossover. We want to showcase everybody. I mean, there wasn't more Morbius in this, but it wasn't just, you were like, oh, this is going to make it a lot easier to explain.
Well, certain things, yeah. I mean, certain things.
The Midnight Suns, they're not just, everyone's just off on their own. And
I can't remember if Ghost Rider showed up in all of the initial issues. He might have, again, for sales reasons, right?
Yeah,
use your biggest magnet to, even though it's a standalone book, Ghost Rider sort of was the star feature. So he might have showed up in every first issue. And then I got saddled with, I think, explaining more of the Lilithness of it all. So the Lilithness of it all was, was to make use then of Strange. And that was the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the stupider things about the Midnight Suns situation ultimately was the fact that Strange should have been the Doctor the Professor Xavier of the Midnight Suns books, right? Why didn't he play a bigger role? And the reason he didn't play a bigger role is because the editor of Doctor Strange didn't want to give up control of Doctor Strange, right? And that was the feeling that if Strange was allowed to become a big player in this, there'd be a land grab, and suddenly Strange would no longer belong to Office X. Strange would belong to Bobby Chase and the Midnight Suns realm, which they didn't want to happen, even though and that's been one of the bigger questions I think over the years when Nightstalkers, the Midnight Sun stuff has come up. Well, why wasn't Strange playing in the space more? Because he should have, right? And that's what we had to do. We came up with this stupid conceit, which Strange says in this issue about, we are too powerful to be in the same space, with Lilith or some nonsense like that, So therefore, these poor feckless, other supernatural characters have to deal with you and get beaten up by you, while I, the Sorcerer Supreme, get to, sip milkshakes on, Bleecker Street.
What an evil name too, Lilith.
Hey.
I'm just
my book.
But that was. I mean, I get to take credit for that one, because that was that was in the unformed space of who the big bad was going to be. I mean, that was one of the occult books, and sort of flipping through it and just explaining to the people who didn't know. Some did, but the folks who didn't know in the meeting that Lilith was the first wife of Adam, right? And that was the whole kickoff from there. That she had been wronged, and then in being wronged, she had turned evil. And this wasn't the biblical Lilith per se, but even in some stories of that biblical Lilith or offshoots of that story, she has her own children called the Lilith, which is what then again we took that name and then expounded on that and twisted in strange ways. And Howard would actually be contacted years later. They never contacted me, but somebody who was writing an academic paper, it might have been a rabbi, about the use of Lilith in popular culture, and contacted Howard, well, how did you guys know so much about Lilith? And, so even though I don't think we ever returned to any source material after that first, sort of exchange, we just ran with it. We apparently kept building on enough things that, it aligned back to the mythological, semi-historical stories.
Very cool.
So I love that is the funniest thing where someone's like you have this big get together and it's just like I brought pizza, I brought this, and then Dan's like
I brought books, nerds.
I brought a whole shelf from my vast occult library.
Oh yeah, I mean I still have all those books. I mean,
nice.
The books over the years. I mean those ones have stuck around. The Dictionary of Demons, and there's
very
some really
interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's
well,
great.
Ken, you love that stuff, so I'm like, yeah, of course. If they do Midnight Suns, they got to include you. I mean. Get that Hellraiser guy, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was more, because you have to remember the Hellraiser stuff and anything else was not looked on, didn't exist as far as Marvel was concerned, right? Marvel editors had no concept of what was going on in Epic, with few exceptions. Mark McLaurin. But I had used Ghost Rider in a Daredevil issue.
Yep.
And Bobby had been impressed with it, however I'd used him, to actually the point where she mentioned it to Howard several times. I really liked what Dan did with Ghost Rider, to the point where Howard was getting either sick of it or worried about it, that and I don't want anybody else touching Ghost Rider. He was like, well, maybe you should use Dan for this new thing we're talking about. And so I don't think it had much to do with my Hellraiser or other horror creds. And at the same time, I was pitching Son of Satan, which is the book I really wanted. When they were relaunching Son of Satan, and I was certain I was going to get that, and I had even remember saying to Bobby, I'm pitching this, and but I just want you to know I'll be able to do them both. It won't get in the way. But then that Son of Satan ended up going to somebody else, and that was, cleared the way for this, which ultimately was better, I guess, in some ways.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I ever told you. I remember that when Daredevil showed up early, or Ghost Rider showed up early in your Daredevil run. Like, I was talking to some kids, because again, I was a kid. They're just like, yeah, at the end of 294, it said he heard a sound of an unnatural engine. Is that the Punisher coming? I said, no, he just did the Punisher, idiot. We got this big in the middle, I think we're sitting by a public pool. I'm like, no, you idiot. You just did the Punisher like an issue or two ago. There's no way. There's no way this guy's going to do that. No, even though I really didn't know much of your writing at that point. I'm like, no, he's not going to do that at that point. I was doing Chichester Chats like 30 years before we started this. No.
Exactly. See? Only had a microphone then.
Exactly.
Good God, early episodes.
Only had internet. Yes. What was I going to say? So did you get to set the roster for this team, or was this like a group decision?
I mean, that's where Bobby had come to me, initially, do you know the characters of Frank Drake and Hannibal King and, Blade? And I did, tangentially, right? I was aware of them. I knew what they were. I knew what they did or what they represented, but I hadn't really been a huge fan of like Tomb of Dracula, where they spent a lot of time or anything. I wasn't not a fan. It just wasn't something I really, spent a lot of time or effort with, but I knew what the characters were. So she said, her pitch to me, that was weird. So, her pitch to me to make a pitch to her was, we want to do something with these three characters, but we don't know what. We don't know how they interact or what they're going to do, or how do they exist as a team or whatever, where they're not just fighting Dracula, right? They just didn't want a book about vampires. So that's where then I went away and kind of came back and looked at it and said, well, I wonder if they did this. What if they acted this way because of what they've gone through? And to talk about like not even really like a connection to probably horror sensibilities. I remember being a little worried. I liked the title, but I was a little worried about the title. And I said to Bobby, I'm not trying to make a connection to the Night Stalker, the Darren McGavin, show. I think we're okay since it's just Night Stalker. It's Night Stalkers, and it's one word. And she just looked at me like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Leave that to legal.
No, not even that. She just had no awareness of the show or the thing at all. So there was no, it would have, if there was an issue, it would have been left illegal, but it wasn't like, I had assumed she was aware of the show, but I don't think she was much of a horror fan ultimately.
I have to say my favorite character in this issue is Meat Market.
Oh yeah, they're all gross. They're all gross, disgusting characters. They're way too gross. I mean, ultimately.
I love it.
He is. Meat Market's fun, but and he's got a good name, but the book is overly grisly after a point,
I don't mind it. It's right up my alley, personally. Like, I was one of those randos reading Dracula and all that stuff at this time. Big fan of the not necessarily like the magic side, but the supernatural side of Marvel for sure. Right.
No, there's a lot of cool stuff there. Yeah, when I say I hadn't read Tomb of Dracula, it wasn't because I don't respect the work or didn't like the work. It just wasn't one of those things that had pinged my radar where I was deeply into it.
Oh, and I love the gun too, Linda, as in Blair,
yes,
as an exorcist. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that would play out a little better than it did. I mean, it played out fine for me, but
No, I thought it was clever. I mean, it was a little clever edge to, the 90s. Everyone had a huge gun. So, I mean,
right. Here's the reason for the huge gun.
And it has a cute name. Yes. And I love the part when Lilith just like strolls into the office, in a nice little dress and the hat and everything. And they're just like, wait, do you think we're buying this? That was cute. And I'm trying to remember if we talked about it when we did talk issues 8 and 9 with Morbius, but Ron Garney's art, I thought Ron Garney's art was
Ron was on fire. Ron Ron did great work. Ron defined everything, obviously visually with that book and attitudinally, and gave it its energy. He was just great. It was great to work with him on a more extended basis, because before we had only worked on that one Daredevil issue really. And then
is that the tried. You're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, it walks in. Yeah.
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 And And, I'm sure, Ron lost the buttons on the blouse and, had a thrill. for all my descriptive powers, I don't think I went to that level of sex appeal. But he really just delivered on the book all throughout.
And I was going to say, was Ron in charge of like the redesigns? Because I know at one point when Blade's leaving the hospital, basically they show leaving the old sunglasses or whatever behind. So was Ron in charge of like the newer design?
Ron did everything visually, in terms of trying to kind of update the characters and what we did with them initially. And then, a little later on, we tried to give them a little bit more, edge or more unique visual, look, where it wasn't just the flowy, old school, kind of draped, a classic Hammer film look on stuff, and something a little bit more, with Blade. We tried to do things with that. I think the looks he did with them, were really cool.
Oh yeah.
It's something we should have done, really right from the get-go in retrospect, just to make them more identifiable, visually identifiable and stand out. So it wasn't just guys, right? I mean, Blade had a cool name, but, Hannibal King and Frank Drake did not. Maybe we should have given them names, too, in retrospect,
Well, they showed up in that Blade Trinity movie. Kind of.
Yeah, they do, right? And they use the term Nightstalkers, right? Yeah. At some point. Although they're not quite.
Yeah, not quite.
Yeah. So I got nothing, I got nothing for that.
They tweaked it just enough that not have to give a shekel.
Not even a little micro credit, and because they're not featured, and then, upsettingly, which, is that Midnight Suns game, which made such a big deal out of bragging about, like, oh yeah, we based it on Lilith, and it's such an important part of our storyline and everything. It's like, we got nothing, on any of that. So
talking about covering your ass, wasn't it like SUNS or something?
Yeah, they went SUNS. Yes. Yeah. Yep. That was that's the major dodge,
Mm-hmm.
I like the setting of Boston.
Huh?
I like the setting of Boston.
So did I. Yeah, I didn't know.
It's very historical and old, and it has a lot of connection. Well, the state itself has a lot of connection to some mystical stuff and ley lines and stuff like that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was my thinking. Let's do something that's not New York, not San Francisco. Which was another obvious choice because trippy, hippie type stuff and some supernatural connections there. But I really liked. I didn't know Boston well at that point, beyond just research and reading and buying books on Boston and maps and trying to kind of use landmarks and make it feel like it was a real thing. But I thought everything you just said, the history, the ley lines, the connection to Salem, the closeness to Salem, those sorts of things were all things I tried to draw on and hope to draw on more of. And lots of cool graveyards, of course.
Yes.
And I mean, it is kind of nice, when you can't get a Marvel book that's not set in New York, because so many of them are set in New York.
It's like, okay, why didn't they bump into this person or this person? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then they're all tripping over each other, And, that's understandable. New York's huge, and that's where a lot of people worked and were or came through, and so it made perfect sense in that larger scale of things, but it's nice to sort of shake things up, too.
So
sorry, Phil.
No, go ahead.
So outside of Ghost Rider, what was another character you were really excited to include and to work with in this bunch, or was it just everybody across the board?
No, I mean I wanted more Strange. I love the chance to write Doctor Strange. I mean even in a little bit, I would love to have done more of him. And Blade was, I mean, he was one of the main characters, but he was a lot of fun. The Darkhold guys I didn't really glom onto, so much. Not because I didn't, they were hard, I think, for anybody except Chris maybe to work on, because Chris could, or maybe I just didn't use them correctly, but Chris could devote more time to them as individuals, whereas when you're sort of using Darkhold concepts on its own, you kind of default to the evil page, sort of thing. And then it becomes the imp, and it's just sort of like this, bad Friday the 13th, not bad, meaning the book was bad, but I mean, this Friday the 13th, the series, type of thing of if you ever saw that TV series, you know, where it was
that weird horror.
Haunted Artifacts.
I'll use horror in quotes. Anthology.
Right. You know, like, so every item in that pawn shop was cursed by the devil or something, and then, you know, so every page in the book is cursed, and you're going to go along with it. But you know, it would have been interesting to do more with those characters, I think, you know, to play them out. Ghost Rider was always fun to play with, as that, you know, just pen and stare, you know, type of thing. And Morbius, I think I got my fill of on Daredevil anyway, since I had used him so extensively in Fall from Grace.
So you think if you could have picked any of them to do a monthly book on, would it have been Doctor Strange then? Is that?
Oh, absolutely. I should have, you know, in the retrospect of, you know, of things in life and, you know, being more assertive or aggressive about things, I wish I had pitched, even if not Strange, the book, you know, a Strange special. I mean, I did pitch a Strange, you know, special with Mark Nelson. You know, we had pitched this, and sold, you know, this, a larger scale what if story, you know, that was called, Hexpionage, right? So it was, I think I mentioned this before, and it was, you know, in a world where there was supernatural kind of everywhere, Strange runs S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury works for Strange in some capacity. And so, and that was, you know, one of the basic parts of the story. So it was, and Mark penciled, you know, half the book before it went up in smoke because Marvel crashed in 90, whatever it was. So that book just got left homeless and nothing ever happened to it. And
never too late to repitch.
You know, if I could get Steve Sobolski's ear, I'd pitch it, because I stole the pages back from Marvel and sent them back to Mark because they were nobody was owning it. It was sitting in a drawer. They were going to be thrown out probably. I mean, that's how bad it was. I mean, there's a lot of artwork stolen or thrown out at that point. So I took the art and sent it back to Mark.
See, Phil didn't believe me. I was mentioning that to him. I didn't say it in so many words, but yeah, like when that particular time, a lot of stuff got like quote unquote lost and forgotten, and it's such a shame.
And when I say steal, I mean I just sent it back to him. I didn't like literally steal it. I just sent it back to Mark and said, "Well, you hold on to this because I know it'll be safe with you, and then hopefully we can get something going." And I tried to bring this up to whoever was left, but you know, the place had been devastated and people were shell shocked and worried about their jobs, and you know, suddenly, you know, they were cutting titles. They weren't looking to add stuff, you know, at that point. So there was a no-win scenario there. But I mean, Mark just did some phenomenal stuff. I mean, there's a 2-page spread of the helicarrier, you know, which is, you know, this gigantic supernatural castle in the sky with, you know, instead of, you know, Quinjets, you know, flying around it, you know, or it's, you know, it's dragons, and it's just, you know, it's amazing.
Oh, come on. I wanted to grow the legend of you, like, rappelling from the ceiling, like Tom Cruise in that first Mission Impossible movie, you know, pulling out of the drawer and stuff.
No, it's sort of more like walking into what was left of Marcus's office. You know, nobody was there. And, you know, is anybody doing anything with, you know, his flat files were there. And it's like, anybody doing anything with the stuff? And, you know, nobody had an answer for anything. So it was, you know, it was sad, bad times.
Oh my God, but I would have loved to seen some Doctor Strange from you, because you know that would have been so dark and so demonic. You know, the editor would be coming to you in every month. Pull back, Dan, pull back. That's too much. It's too much.
I mean, you know, Strange is, I mean, I probably would have, you know, he's only in a handful of pages there, right?
Yeah.
Nightstalkers.
I mean, like a monthly.
It would have been more like that. It would have been sort of imperious and interesting and crafty and, you know, delving into, you know, not just the horrific and the demonic, but I think there would be an interesting place to spin out the magic, you know, ness of it, you know, the sorcery, you know, where does that like lead him? I would have hoped I would have done, you know, things like that. You know, the Nightstalkers universe, you know, is sort of, you know, very dark, and I don't know that I would want to go on as dark with a Strange thing. I don't think anybody smiles in that book ever.
Well, it was the 90s. A lot of people.
I was gonna say, yeah, it was the 90s.
Yeah, even by 90s standards, I think Nightstalkers is particularly grim and fierce.
But okay, I want to manifest this into the universe. I think what we need is a monthly Marvel horror anthology book by you. Again, it could be a different character every month. You know, it could be Doctor Strange, it could be Ghost Rider, it could be Werewolf by Night. But the person that introduces the book every month, Crypt Keeper style, is Terror.
But didn't I tell you the story? That is the proto Midnight Suns. Because that's what, that's how Terror ended up in the Marvel universe was.
Maybe that's it.
Carl Thompson called and said, they wanted to do mythology. They wanted to feature different horror characters, Werewolf by Night, whatever, Frankenstein Unbound, whatever it was, a Living Mummy, I don't know. But they wanted Terror to be, or Shrek, to be the script keeper. So, the initial charge was, figure out a way to get this guy over here, and how would you use him as a crypt keeper, and introduce these characters and sort of interact with them, and then let them tell their stories, and maybe be in the story with them. And then, so that's where the work had begun, and, changing the name, and okay, he's going to be this, he's going to be that. But then Carl said, well, they've got some ideas. They've got other ideas for the horror characters. And at that point, I didn't know what that was. And then that's when I had said, okay, well, I guess this is dead. And he said, no, we're going to do it anyway, as its own self-standing book. But it's interesting that, I would have thought ultimately the Midnight Suns, in retrospect, should have pulled in some of the other more heavy hitters, or at least more recognizable horror characters. I mean, Morbius is okay, but he's still a little fringe. Hannibal and Frank are definitely fringe. Why didn't we pull in Werewolf by Night? Why didn't we pull in Man-Thing? And part of that reason again may have been editorial ownership. Nobody, Bobby was able to lay claim to these other characters either because they sort of fell within her realm because of some historical thing, or maybe she went to some editor and they're like, I don't care what you do with it, I'm not doing anything. And maybe she tried to get those. We never really talked about that.
Yeah, it might have been editorial, because they did have that Secret Defenders book, with Doctor Strange putting together a different team every time. And again, it was Spider-Man, Captain America, Wolverine. So it wasn't like supernatural for the most part. Right. So I guess, I'd heard stories about that, but people were really staking their territory back then, and basically just like, they didn't want to lose a book under their, editors didn't want to lose book under their control. Yeah,
typically then, and maybe, and now to some extent, because, I think I mentioned at one point, the Red Skull was supposed to be the main villain in Black Armor, right? That was my initial pitch. And, wouldn't have changed the story dramatically, but would have certainly changed the tone of certain things. And we had the go-ahead from the office that owned the Red Skull, but then they pulled that permission. And then that's when we had to, fall back, but or rethink it rather. But that was, always the case. Editorial offices own characters, whether they are in a regular book or because the character has a relationship to the main character. I'm assuming whatever office has Thor owns Loki, even if Loki is not in a regular monthly book or something like that. So, and loaning a character out was sometimes easy. 8 times out of 10 would be easy. Can I use Carnage? And as long as Carnage isn't in a big story that same month that would cause a conflict, the editor would say, yeah, okay. And then they'd read the script, make sure you're not doing anything Carnage
making him nice, making sure he has his optimal kill.
Right. And then, then it would be okay. But I think the concern, as I sort of picked up at the time, and then more so, I think over time, was that they wanted to, the Midnight Suns offices, Bobby's office, didn't want to just use Strange. They wanted to own Strange. They wanted Strange to sort of, like I said, be that Professor X, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
They're a heavy hitter. The most heavy hitter magic character in the Marvel Universe is Doctor Strange. So if this whole thing is about this epoch of unleashed darkness and evil, why isn't he more involved on an issue to issue, or at least, month to month basis, showing up and directing things and advising and manipulating and doing this. But I think there was a combination of, they definitely were not going to give you the character, right? And I think there was an attempt to sort of make it a land grab. And then I think that editor, who I think was Ralph, maybe, Macchio, at that point, just put their foot down, and then maybe didn't want to even loan the character out because didn't want it mixed up in this other thing for fear that it would become a land grab. Remember, like Kingpin was initially a Spider-Man villain, right? Yep. Now Kingpin, for a long time now is a Daredevil villain and owned by the Daredevil offices, as it were. So, and that came over time because, it just had become so identified, that conflict between the two of them, that it was, easy to sort of, it's like a squatter moving into your house, then suddenly you're like, get rid of it.
But yeah, because it was around that era, wasn't it, that like they started reorganizing everything, and there's a Spider-Man office, there's an X-Men office, there's a
well,
was that later on?
I think that was always sort of that way. When I came in 84 or whatever, 85, there was offices that owned things. There was an X-Men office, and there was Spider-Man office, and there was offices that had maybe non-related titles, but Daredevil and Cap or whatever were owned by Ralph's office, those sort of things. But then there was an attempt later on, or not too long after, which was part of the kicking me off of Daredevil, where there was a regrouping under imprints within the imprint, right? So what was it, Marvel Edge?
Yeah.
And so Edge was supposed to be the street characters, right? Daredevil and the Punisher, and I don't know what else, but that was mixed up.
For some reason, Ghost Rider, Punisher, yeah.
Well, and the Hulk, right? Wasn't Hulk because Bob
Fury,
Bobby already owned Hulk and already owned Ghost Rider, but then it makes no sense, right? It's not the street characters then; it's just the characters you think are, I don't know, whatever. But they try to kind of then sort of like group it differently in that way. But that was also when Marvel had 5 editors in chief. Right, that was Bobby was an editor in chief. Carl Potts was an editor in chief. Bob, I can't remember who the other ones were. Bob Budiansky, I think. I don't know how you can have 5 editors in chiefs. So. Yeah,
I was just talking to Tom DeFalco recently. Yeah, and I heard that. Yeah, that whole
Right.
He was the major guy before that shakeup. So
Tom was editor in chief. So to this day, people who knew him, we'll still say, chief.
It's so funny because like you keep saying Bobby, and I'm just like, oh yeah, because like I know her as Barbara, so it's like just really funny.
Oh, okay.
Most people know her as Bobby, but like for some reason, this is Barbara in my head. I'm like, no, it's the same person.
Right.
But it was super interesting, like this whole like how Midnight Suns comes about, and like I enjoyed Nightstalkers itself, and it's just like I just felt like the Darkhold stuff is like, I guess you guys needed it for whatever reason, but I was like, it's always like something I actually skipped in the rereads. I'm like, I could just get to the good stuff.
But the genius, quote unquote, of what we did, and that by we I mean Chris, me, Howard, Len, was in stitching something together that didn't have any rights to sort of be stitched together, because it wasn't like sort of. It was very hodgepodge and duct taped and zip tied, from the get go. But we made it work, and we kind of liked what we were doing initially again, because it started with Ghost Rider, right? Then it's like, let's do another Ghost Rider book, Spirit of Vengeance, which I think Howard already had in mind anyway. So there's 2 of them, right? Mm-hmm. Now Len had been carrying that Morbius pitch in his back pocket for I don't know how long. And the minute he heard there was horror stuff going on, he came into Bobby's office and like, here. And so that made Bobby's job easier. And Chris, conveniently, is Bobby's assistant. And I think did much the same. Oh, by the way, I have something here. So kind of the only one that was organic in a way. And I don't, again, know why they decided on this assembly of characters. Like, why not just do a Blade book, as opposed to Blade, Hannibal King, and Frank Drake. I'm glad they did. It was more interesting that way, sort of. But, was pitching out to various writers to kind of come back with proposals for what would you do with these characters. And I just happen to have been, fortunate or skilled enough to kind of come up with something that resonated differently than whatever the other ones were. But it wasn't like there was, like a really, the gathering made no sense. So that's probably why like a Darkhold feels discordant, Lilith, a little bit, because it was more just a cool idea that Chris had. And then we ended up putting it under this. And it was, tough, right? Because it's not even while the three characters, Harkness, and I can't remember all of them, but, they were against the evil of the Darkhold, right? The fact was the most recognizable character from the book was the imp, right?
Yes.
And pages. So it's a tricky thing to kind of relate to when all your stories are driven by the guy doing the evil thing.
Yeah, and then I get why you guys kind of plucked Lilith out of there, but it's like the elder gods are like, because it's briefly mentioned in that one. It's like kind of the more infinite, interesting story for me.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Lilith mythology, I do, obviously, but like the elder gods, I'm just like, oh man, you mentioned it. Why'd you mention? If you would have mentioned that, I would have been thinking about it.
Right. I mean, it was also an attempt to kind of come up with your own thing, trying to make this world its own thing, and not necessarily proprietary. Though maybe a little bit, but not just like, oh yeah, they should be fine. I mean, at one point, I'm 99% certain, maybe they should be fighting Mephisto, and it was like, right? Because all right, Mephisto, he's the big evil, and then we move past that, because like, oh, that's just going to be like everyone's fighting Mephisto, So trying to kind of create up, how do you create your Doctor Doom? How do you create your whatever, sort of from whole cloth? And I think we did a pretty good job.
Oh, definitely. Like I said, once the main Nightstalkers book, I was hooked. It was just like kind of that getting everything up and over to that point. Because like so many different books, I was just like, okay, now I gotta go find this one.
Right. And
I read it after, obviously after, so it's definitely harder when you're not like doing it at the time.
Mm-hmm. And I know that I remember, while Bobby did not apparently know much about horror, and went blank on the Nightstalker, reference I tried to make, at one point, she was a huge fan of Maleficent, the Disney character, which is why Lilith looks like she does, because in discussing her, she's got that raised bony, forehead, sort of like Maleficent's, crown and horns or whatever. And so when we found that out, then we were like, all right, well, Lilith is gonna, have some kind of visual nod to that, as a nice nod to, Bobby hosting us all.
But so you feel like it's too gruesome? I don't feel like it's gruesome enough. There, I said it.
Well, by that I mean it's, and this, I've talked with Howard about this, and over the years when we've wanted to revisit this. The thing is, we began to revel in the gruesome horrorness of it so fast, Meat Market and can't remember. There's a character from one of the latter books with the Shield monster guys, the DOA, not the Shield, the Hydra, Department of Occult Antiquities or whatever, one of them like squeezes acid out of its stomach to burn people. It's just so grisly that it becomes hard to have like a point of entry for, I think, an ordinary reader, to kind of play into it. And I think like ultimately the success of Ghost Rider is more around, it's a superhero book with supernatural touches and trappings, versus it being a pure play supernatural horror book with superhero action. And I think that's what these at least Nightstalkers became. And by reveling in that so much, you don't have enough of a point of entry for the everyday reader.
Just for rap is all I'll say.
Yeah, but I know
what you're saying, but it was cool for me.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of counter it to, and this is after the fact, but I sort of counter it to the Nightbreed work I did, which is very grisly as well and horrific, and the characters are very strange and clearly monstrous and everything. But there's a lot more humor and humanity in that. And because they were monstrous, but we didn't approach it that way. I don't know. And maybe that was, just being invested in Clive's world in a different way with that. But I don't dislike the Nightstalkers. It's just sort of like being analytical about it, like after the fact.
Gotcha.
Did we lose Phil? He's just been I think he's or did he nod off? He's frozen on my screen.
He might be frozen.
Yeah. Oh, there he goes.
Oh, there he goes.
Just me and you. But I do think I also just think it's too, like he was joking before, or maybe not joking, about it being a 90s book and extreme and grim and all that, that kind of stuff. But it is too intense. It is everything is, Blade is always, the power of the supernatural.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I could see you guys perfectly, so I didn't know it was frozen. But I've been having trouble here. But no, I said my favorite part was the ending where they're like, "Oh, sorry, we almost got tricked into killing you, but eventually we're going to kill you."
Yeah, no, that's it. I love that line. Yeah. That's what I meant with the beginning of the conversation. It's we're going to kill everybody, and then we're going to kill ourselves. Oh, I think we froze him again. This is the curse of Lilith.
It is
not you, Lilith, the other Lilith.
What was your favorite character dynamic to write, actually? Between two characters?
I like the dynamic between all three of them, but they would argue all the time, and I needed to find some different things, I was so, I think, intent on making it grim and fierce and powerful and brooding and look how they confront this and how they get over on it, that there was never a moment to really sort of allow it to breathe. So I liked the banter amongst them, but the banter was more just, the banter was 22 pages of, that shot from the first Predator movie where Carl Weathers and Schwarzenegger, do the grip, if you've ever seen that, and they do and it's their muscles are bulging, and it's that's what it felt like the whole book was all the
time. All right. Well, anything else for this man, Lilith?
No, I think we can let him get back to it.
All right. Thanks again, guys, and sorry for the delay, but
thanks for the walk. It was out of your control, so it's all.
Appreciate the walk down Nightstalkers Lane. As the sun goes down, who knows what might happen.
But I was thinking next time there's a story you and Margaret did from Solo Avengers number 10. Maybe we'll do that.
Dr. Druid!
Yes!
Dr. Druid, Dr. Dopey, as Margaret called him. But that was fun, because that was also the guy named Lee Weeks, if I recall. Correct.
Oh, yes, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, we could talk about Dr. Druid. And another, maybe if we couldn't, since we couldn't get Strange, we should have brought him,
Oh, yeah.
It's never too late to pitch. Never too late.
Never too late. Never too late. Cool. And then for folks who are listening to this, if you are in the Connecticut area, on the 27th of July, I will be at something called the Collecticon, a small one-day show in Montville, Connecticut. So look it up, and I think it's 10 to 4, something like that. So it looks like pretty well populated show from what I've seen from previous years, photos at least, and drop by and say hi.
Oh, yeah. And again, kids, we met him in person. Really nice guy. He'll give you the time of day. He won't just sign your stuff and say, get out of here.
Get out of here.
He's got a pretty cool setup, too.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. I could actually bring the helmet with me. I can't do that when I fly anymore. It's just too much hassle, but I can definitely bring it to Collecticon. Anyway, thank you, folks. Have a wonderful evening, rest of your evening, and have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you, sir. As always, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.